Hi, everyone. This is Samira Daswani, the host of the podcast, The Patient from Hell. I think this is the first time I have a husband-wife duo on our podcast. So welcome, Megan and Mike.
Thank you.
We're happy to be here.
Can one of you guys tell me what you guys do, maybe not full-time, with Worth the Wait and how that came to be?
Yeah, so with Worth the Wait, we help adolescent and young adult cancer survivors either preserve fertility before cancer treatment on an emergency basis, or help them build families through financial assistance grants. So that's how Worth the Wait really started, and at this point, we continue to do that. But at the same time, now we're also much larger in education and advocacy around why the conversation about fertility and how cancer treatment can affect fertility is so important for adolescents and young adults.
And how did you guys end up working in the space?
So Megan and I, we got married at 23. So married pretty young. We were high school sweethearts. We actually started dating at 15. And just a few years into our marriage, so 3 years into our marriage, I was diagnosed with testicular cancer. So, went from being hard-charging, career-oriented young professionals to all of a sudden cancer patient and caregiver. And it was about a 2-year, time frame where I was being treated for testicular cancer and Megan was taking care of me. And so following that whole experience, when we were ready to start a family, we were thrown back into, an uncertain time period because it was very difficult for us to start a family due to, what my, life-saving cancer treatment did to my fertility.
I am sorry to hear that. Before we go into the cancer story, can I go back to when you guys were 15?
Sure.
Where did you guys go to school? How did y'all meet?
We went to separate elementary and middle schools, but we were in Spanish together freshman year of high school. And I frankly just thought he was so annoying. And then we ended up in a giant auditorium study hall sophomore year. And for some reason, they didn't seat us alphabetically because my maiden name C, his name S. Somehow we ended up sitting. He sat behind me, and he started throwing little notes at me, and he won me over.
Megan, which note won you over?
Oh my gosh, Mike is so funny, so it was probably a joke.
That is incredible, you guys. So you guys met at 15. You got married at 23. Right. Mike, when was diagnosis?
I was 26.
Ouch. And when did you guys end up talking about building a family?
Yeah, so actually I remember I finished treatment in 2012. Right after treatment, one of the first questions we asked the doctor was like, hey, when should we start thinking about this? How long do we have to wait? He said, give it at least 1 year. We waited 2 years, so it was 2014 is when we really got serious about starting a family.
Mike, can you talk to us about what kind of treatment you went through, if you don't mind?
Sure. Yeah, I had what's called non-seminoma testicular cancer. So it's an aggressive cancer. It has a very high cure rate, especially when you receive chemotherapy. The chemotherapy can be pretty brutal for it. So I had surgery first to remove my tumor. And then I went on a surveillance protocol. So just regular chest x-rays, CT scans, and blood work. And then after a few months of that, it had spread to lymph nodes. So that's when I had to get through 3 rounds of chemotherapy.
Are you still on a surveillance protocol today?
Nope, cancer free.
Yay! That's awesome.
Thanks. Yeah, yep.
one of the other survivors on the Manta team talks about how she's been dating Ned. So now I just have to ask you, I'm assuming you've been dating Ned for a long time.
Yeah, after chemotherapy, it was a surveillance protocol for about 5 years after. And then once I was through that surveillance protocol with no evidence of disease, they actually, with testicular cancer, declared you cured.
Wow, that's incredible. Yay.
Yeah. So I have a cured status, and it feels great to have that status, but like I tell a lot of people, cancer never really leaves your life. You think about it every single day. It's a part of who I am and who we are now. And, you deal with something every single day due to having cancer.
I definitely relate. Megan, what was that like for you? 26, your husband gets diagnosed.
Yeah, I mean, it was certainly unexpected. And I'm a pretty type A person. So I'm just going to control everything I can control in this situation. So Mike actually had to work through a lot of his treatment. We were both working for small businesses at the time, so we didn't have FMLA. So I got a little sign-up genius, and I got all of our friends and family to take him to chemo, and all of our family is local, so that was really helpful. And I don't think I would have gotten through it without my mom's support. And we just, when you're 26, you're not thinking about becoming a caregiver. You're not thinking about someone you love being diagnosed with cancer. So it was crazy, but we look at where we are now and what we've achieved with Worth the Wait. And I don't think Mike would ever say he's glad he got cancer, but I think a lot of good things came out of the experience.
I can relate to that as well. I'm not that far out. You're four. You're four, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So getting there, hopefully.
Yeah, I was there.
You're on the right path.
Awesome.
So what before we go into Worth the Wait, could you talk a bit more about what you guys went through? So you're 26, 28-ish when treatment starts to kind of close out. You start having a family. What happens next?
Yeah, we had spoken to my doctors and kind of said, hey, when we're trying to start a family, what do we need to know next? And the recommendation was just try for a year, and if you're not having any success, then come back and see us. We tried for about 6 months, and we were like, we're just going to, talk to a doctor again. So at that point, we actually went to Megan's OBGYN, and they started to really introduce us to the world of, fertility treatments and different things we could be doing. So we had a lot of discussions, and Megan and I decided that IUIs were our best path, just for our lives at the time. So we started doing IUIs. It ended up being about a 2-year process with no insurance coverage. On top of just doing procedures, you're also doing plenty of tests and blood draws and different things just to try and give you the best chance. But we had done 6 IUIs, and we were close to giving up at that time and saying, okay, let's look into adoption. So we started to really go down that path and explore adoption, talked to some adoption agencies as well as folks who had adopted, and just decided, let's just give it one more shot. So Megan went on some pretty hardcore injectable drugs, and we did one final IUI, and that gave us our miracle son, Elliot.
Thank you for sharing that. How old is Elliot?
He is 7.
It's a wonderful age.
Yeah, he's a lot of fun.
It is so fun. And looking back on that experience, knowing what we know now, I would have done some things, very differently. So an IUI is intraseminal insemination. So you can take like hormonal medication to increase your egg count, and then they basically take a sperm sample, spin it, and then put it back in. So the conception actually like happens inside your body rather than with IVF, which is, in a petri dish. But we used all of the sperm that Mike banked for our IUIs that were failing, one after another. So we had used everything he had frozen in advance. And so that was definitely an interesting experience. It was like, we have nothing left. We're going off of fresh samples. So it really was a miracle that we were able to have our son. And when he was about a year old, we were like, okay, like we want to do this again. So we ended up having a few more IUIs. And then Mike at the time had kind of met with a new doctor, and he was like, no one ever should have done that. Like, there's no way that was going to work. You guys really need to go to IVF, which is in vitro fertilization, where, embryos are created outside of the body. And we were like, oh my gosh, we've been through so much. Like, we don't want to do this, but we just felt like if we didn't, we would have regrets later, when we had a chance. And we were young enough that, we were going to have a good shot at it. So we ended up doing just one round because it's so expensive. And like Mike said, there's no insurance. We personally didn't have insurance coverage for it. So we said, that's our limit. We're going to do one. We were able to create one embryo, and then we transferred it, and it didn't work. So at that point, we were like, we gave it our best shot, and we're so happy to, be parents to our son. And then COVID hit, and we were like, oh my gosh, there's so much wrong with the world right now. Like, what can we do to do our part to do something, to improve humanity? And we thought, like, what are the causes that are important to us? And we're like, young people with cancer and fertility. And so we came up with the idea to, start a charity that would provide grants to people who were, freezing eggs, sperm, embryos, and then building families in survivorship through adoption, surrogacy, IVF. And we got it started, and it caught on pretty quick.
I can totally see that. Especially, when did you guys start this?
2021.
Oh, look at that. I don't think we can have a conversation about fertility without talking about the macro landscape that we live in. And it sounds like when you guys were going through it, when you started this in 2021, things kept shifting, if I remember right. Can you guys talk a bit about how you have managed to pull this together in the environment we live in?
Yeah, it's, anymore with the environment we live in, it's kind of a new thing every single day. And I don't think we really sat down and kind of discussed the impact that the environment we live in could have on Worth the Wait until, probably last year at some point. So we're in Ohio, and, we had a vote last year where they did enshrine abortion rights into Ohio's Constitution. We were actually at an Onco fertility conference the night of that vote. And I can tell you it was an international conference, and the entire conference had eyes on that vote, Ohio specifically. There were so many conversations about, okay, let's use this as kind of a litmus test as to what could potentially happen here. So, Ohio had that vote, and that was encouraging for us. But at the same time, then we see the news coming out of Alabama with embryo personhood laws. And, it's such a volatile time, and it changes every day. Unfortunately, the people who really get caught up in these changes are young adult survivors who, they need to preserve fertility, and they might not be able to, or they might not be able to have a family without, assisted reproductive technologies. And, not only that, but young adult cancer survivors, it's a fact that they have a net worth of about $100,000 at least less than people who are not cancer survivors. So, not only are these procedures really expensive, but, add to that, hey, you might not even be able to do it in your own state. So then you have to travel. It's such a struggle. And, not to get political, but I think the laws around these things can't be black and white, because when you take that hardline black and white stance, a lot of things fall through the cracks. And, it was so devastating to finish cancer treatment and be on cloud nine, understanding like, oh my gosh, we got through this. We survived as a couple. We can go back to our normal lives. And then all of a sudden, when we start trying to have a family, you're thrown right back into the despair and the uncertainty. And, we had the opportunity. We could get procedures done, even though we paid for it out of pocket. But I can't imagine being told, like, nope, you can't get help here. You have to go somewhere else. So, luckily, at this point, it hasn't impacted us all that much as a charity, but who knows what the future holds.
Mike, can I go back to early diagnosis? Did you know back then the impact it would have on fertility for you?
So one of the first things my surgical oncologist said is, hey, you need to go bank sperm. And, they actually, with testicular cancer, looking at a lot of the statistics, even when you receive chemo, a lot of the statistics say your fertility should go back to a pretty normal level after you're treated. But like my oncologists were great. So they still said, hey, don't follow the statistics. If this is something that's important to you, we encourage you to bank sperm. So both my medical oncologist and my surgical oncologist gave me those recommendations. I don't know, if Megan really thought about the fertility aspect all that much beyond banking. I personally did not. Interestingly enough, Megan had to convince me to even go bank, because I was immediately in that, okay, I need to get through these treatments and see what's next mindset. And so I didn't want any distractions. Luckily, I had, a partner who said, like, this isn't a distraction. This is necessary planning for us and for something we might want in the future. But yeah, I was fortunate to be counseled, and it's something like 50% of oncologists are even, counseling patients on the potential impacts for fertility. But I think the other important thing there too is I have heard that people will look at statistics and say, well, if this treatment's if it doesn't look like it's going to be gonadal toxic, we don't need to have that conversation, or we don't need to counsel you. And interestingly enough, my fertility was significantly impacted. And it was continuing to decline as I was getting semen analysis done, after the fact. So if I had, relied on statistics, we likely wouldn't be where we are today. So, I think it's still something that we always say as cancer survivors, we're not a statistic. And, I think that's an important message for people who are going through this, is like, don't focus on that. If you want to potentially have all the options on the table in survivorship, consider, the precautions and the procedures that you might need to go through.
I have so many questions for you guys. Can we talk a bit more about the finances? Because there's the finances of going through treatment, cancer treatment.
Right.
And then you're grappling with the finances of fertility. And I'm an EY survivor myself. I'm assuming some sort of commercial insurance for at least the cancer side. I'd love to unpack your point on net worth in the AYA population, because I think that's critical here. So can you maybe talk a bit about that general theme?
Yeah, so there's a nonprofit called the SAM Fund, and they provide financial assistance, help with rent, bills. They also do some family building grants for survivors, not patients, but survivors. And they did a study, I think it was back in 2018. And so we love sharing their data of that net worth $100,000 less. So you asked us to be vulnerable. We spent about $100,000 to try to have 2 children. And that's something that's not accessible to a lot of people. And, we were nervous when Mike was going through treatment about like, how is this going to affect our jobs? We were kind of in unique situations. I was working at a family business. So I was like, well, I know I'm not going to lose my job over this, right? But Mike wasn't. And so we thought about like, oh my gosh, what if one of us can't work? And even in survivorship, like it took until 10 years of survivorship for Mike to be able to buy additional life insurance. And so things like that if you're not a survivor, if you're not in this cancer world, you don't realize what an impact is, what it is. And so when you think about, patients, survivors are 100,000 less because they've taken off time, work, they have medical debt, they've gone through probably the most difficult point in their life, and now they find out that they can't have a child in your traditional, way, and, you need to afford IVF, which can cost $30,000 at least. It's just, when you think about having access to this type of care and having the financial resources, there's so much improvement that needs to be done. And so when we started Worth the Wait, we were like, you know what, let's just try to help a few people and see how it goes. And then we realized like, there's a few other nonprofits that are in this space and they're all wonderful. We know them all. We work with all of them, but there's not enough of us. We don't have enough money to, raise and give out to help all the young adult cancer patients and survivors with this really unmet need.
Megan, there are a couple of things you mentioned that I'd love to double click on. The first is life insurance. I think that's a I had this, I grew up in India, and I remember I live in the US now, I went back home. You're called a NRI, a non-resident Indian. And you can't actually invest in the Indian market if you have NRI status. So I go back, the only form of investing in the market, at least at the time of this conversation, was life insurance. So I'm sitting across the table from a life insurance agent trying to tell me that I should buy life insurance. And I look at him, I'm like, I'm almost certain I won't qualify. And he goes, why? I was like, well, I'm a cancer survivor. He goes, oh, so am I. And I just remember this moment. And he was like, yeah, I don't qualify either. And I'm like, this is just, we have a life insurance agent trying to tell me I should get life insurance. Neither of us actually qualify for the rules. And it's just this moment of time where it's just like, it's an interesting world we live in. I love your take on it.
Yeah, I think life insurance was actually one of the things that we didn't really think about until, and it's funny because I'm a financial planner. So I do that for people all day long, plan for their life insurance. I do not sell life insurance. But, when we had Elliot, that's when we kind of sat down and said, oh my gosh, I need more life insurance because, now we have this little person here and we need to have funds available should, something happen to either of us. And again, it takes an awful lot of work, especially with the cancer history. And yeah, luckily enough, I had enough time since treatment that I was able to qualify, but it was and still remains to be, more expensive than it would have otherwise been. So, I think the other thing that young adult cancer survivors grapple with, like with our insurance, we had insurance and our insurance worked out. It was decent insurance, but we just knew even 5 years out, I was doing surveillance we were going to hit our out-of-pocket maximum every single year. It was guaranteed. You know, I would basically schedule my first surveillance follow-ups for January. My insurance would renew, and boom, I'm in my out-of-pocket max already. So, you know, insurance certainly helps, but it was still a burden on us, and that's even beyond, you know, trying to start a family.
Mike, I think you're the first. I think you might be the first survivor I've met who just shared that story with you. I did the same thing. I, in fact, denied the first biopsy because it was the second last week of December. And I was like, we're going to wait for the year to roll over. We're going to wait for Jan 1, because otherwise the bill you end up getting is, these numbers get big very quickly. And very recently, someone had asked me to write an op-ed that hopefully will come out at some point. And I ran the numbers, and even if you look across plans, and I mean, I'm talking commercial insurance, you look at across plans, HMO plans, PPO plans, high deductible plans, your average out-of-pocket max, and if you include premiums, you're looking at $19,000 to $22,000 on average. And I'm with you. I hit my out-of-pocket max every January because that's when I schedule my surveillance. And those numbers, I don't know how you afford that in the US. Like, it's really difficult to afford that effectively into perpetuity, because, at least in my case, I'm going to have screening and imaging done at least for the next 6 years, if not longer. And I don't know how you can even afford basic surveillance in oncology anymore.
Yeah, it is a challenge. That is one of the reasons. Well, I was getting treated for cancer. The last thing I wanted to worry about was my work. But, you know, the harsh reality of it is, man, I feel like I need to still be an asset to my company in some way, because I don't want them to say, oh, sorry, but we're going to cut you loose. Now, luckily, you know, I worked for a smaller business that I now own a piece of. And, you know, I was extremely fortunate to have, at that time, bosses that said, don't worry about it. Like, even if you're not working, we're going to take care of you. But it was still a fear of mine. So I still tried to make myself as valuable and indispensable as I could. But, you know, I think the other thing that creeps in there and also changes things for cancer survivors compared to other, you know, people not dealing with that is even networks, right? So your networks can change, which can impact the care that you get and the quality of care you get based on what you can afford and what your plan offers. So, you know, I one of my, like, it was a memory that really, it gives me, you know, a lot of anxiety, or ick, as people call it now. I got a phone call one time from my insurance company, and they called me and they said, hey, you've been getting your imaging done at this hospital center, but there's a center that's not very far from you that will do the same imaging and then ship it to your oncologist, and it's a fraction of the cost. And, you know, I just kind of laughed, and I said, well, are you telling me that you're going to cover the place that I go to? And they said, yeah, we're covering it, but we just want you to be aware that there's a place not too far from you that is a fraction of the cost. And I laughed and I said, I'm going to hang up now, and I'm not going to change anything because I have insurance for a reason. And, you know, the system is broken if you have to come to me to tell me I need to manage my costs. This sounds like a you problem. But, you know, that's the harsh reality of the system that we live in.
Sure, Mike. I get it. Yep, definitely been there. Those insurance calls.
Right.
How did you navigate fertility on top of this?
You know, I don't really think we ever sat down and kind of calculated out what we were spending, because it would have been overwhelming. Megan and I are very open. We were very fortunate that we could do that.
Yeah.
We worked very hard, but, we still were able to afford it. And yeah, we certainly had to change other aspects of our life style, but, we had that gift to be able to do it. And, once we were finished and we looked at the numbers, that's when we really came to the realization that this is crazy. And it, we're shocked that we were able to do it. So it hit us really afterwards. And it is kind of funny because I think a lot of parents, you'll hear them talk about how expensive their children are. And we laugh because we were like, man, we spent a majority of it before our kid was even here. But, I think that's the other thing that we wanted to do with Worth the Wait, because we look into the eyes of our child now and we don't think, man, you were an expensive little guy. We just think we're so fortunate to have you here and be able to raise you. And when we sat down to start Worth the Wait, we said, okay, do we believe that let's say a young adult survivor said, hey, I'm not going to try to have a family simply because I can't afford it. So there's a financial barrier, and that's the only reason. If we were able to come along and say, hey, we'll remove that financial barrier, so are you willing to go through what is also a difficult process? Let's say you're doing IVF. Like, would you be willing to do that if we were able to remove that financial burden? And, the answer was yes. So we said, okay, that's what we need to do. And even with, IUIs and IVF, the statistics aren't all that favorable that it's going to work. It takes multiple times in many cases. But we said, would you be willing to deal with these statistics if the financial burden was lessened or removed? And, again, the overwhelming response was yes. So that's why we set out and said, okay, that's what we're going to try our hardest to do.
That's incredible, you guys. That really is incredible. I can't tell you how many times we have someone comes to our community and asks us for this. So now we know what to send them.
Definitely. And the shame of it is we're doing what we can right now, and it's still a fraction of the cost that we're able to alleviate. So, it needs to get better in so many different aspects.
And there's so many stories of, I'm hearing from tons of AYA patients every week who are reaching out for assistance. And there are people who are maxing out their credit cards to pay for it. There's people I know that are selling t-shirts, that are selling popcorn, that are doing these things because this is the one thing in their life that they want to have a chance at. And, if we can come alongside them and relieve some of that burden, and, our grants they average $2,500, which is a lot of money, but it's not always enough depending on, what treatment you're seeking and where you live and how expensive it is. We can pay for a lot of sperm bankings with that size of a grant. And there are some really amazing partners that we work with that, hospital foundations, that comprehensive cancer centers are really helping to reduce some of the costs of, egg freezing. But these patients need us so much. And even some of the higher income earners, because we have criteria for, who qualifies, and it depends on how much money we raise and all of that. But there's this one patient that keeps reaching out to me, and they make $150,000 a year. And that seems like a lot for most people, right? And they're trying to do surrogacy, which costs $200,000 to do surrogacy. And I have to keep saying, I'm so sorry, we're getting all these applications from people who are making way less than you. And, keep reaching out if you want. But, there's people that are in far worse, financial strain. And that's just hard. So we wish we had all the money in the world to be able to, help people keep the hope of parenthood alive.
Those numbers are staggering.
Yep.
I'm kind of stuck on the 200,000 for surrogacy.
Mhm. I mean, it's an industry, and there's certainly people who are trying to do it themselves if they have a family member or friend who can be, the gestational carrier, but there's still a lot of legal fees. All the money has to go in an escrow account beforehand. If the gestational surrogate's insurance isn't surrogate friendly, you have to pay for that whole extra insurance plan. They're buying them on the marketplace that are surrogate friendly. So there's just so many costs that you don't even think about that are, it's not like it's going in the pocket of the surrogate.
Mm. Wow. Guys, I can ask you questions, I think, for hours. I think I'm gonna have to transition us to rapid fire. That's a series of questions that I can ask you. Mostly what and how questions. Short answers usually, so that we can clip it and give the community the sort of short version of the podcast. I took a couple of notes, and I may ask you for clarification on a couple of things that you've mentioned as well. So I think this is the first time we're doing a rapid fire with two people. So you guys decide who wants to take the question. How about that? Does that work?
Okay.
All right. First one. What is IUI?
I'll take it actually, Megan. IUI is intrauterine insemination. So it is an assisted reproductive technique where conception actually still occurs, not in a petri dish, but it's really in layman's terms, it's a way to deliver the sperm more effectively into the uterus.
What is IVF?
That is in vitro fertilization. So eggs are harvested from the female, and then they are fertilized with sperm, an embryo is created, and then they use a catheter and put it back in for transfer.
What is FMLA?
Oh, that's Family Medical Leave Act. So that is basically like protection for your job for a certain amount of time if you're a patient or a caregiver.
What is gonadotoxic?
So gonadal toxicity is essentially the measurement of the impact that your treatment will have on your ability to conceive.
I'm reading my own handwriting, guys. Give me a second. All right, we're going to skip that one. When should patients and partners ask about fertility options after a diagnosis?
Right away. You don't have time to waste. And, depending on the diagnosis, you may have a very short window. Banking sperm takes a day, but preserving eggs can take weeks. And so you want to know upfront.
What are the primary fertility preservation options for families dealing with cancer?
So for males, sperm banking. There is also something that's very experimental right now that they're doing some really unique research at the University of Pittsburgh. And it's called testicular tissue cryopreservation. So for young boys who have not gone through puberty yet, they're taking the tissue out, doing some interesting things, and there's some monkey babies from it. And then for females, there's egg preservation, which can be turned into embryos when fertilized. And then this is no longer experimental. There's ovarian tissue cryopreservation. And so that is great for young adolescents. They can even do it in babies. And then they later put the tissue back in. So it's really a great option for people that don't have time for an egg freeze, or if they're not mature enough to do that.
Megan, this one's for you. What is your biggest tip for someone who's helping someone they love deal with cancer treatment?
Make sure you have a support person.
Mike, this one's for you. what is the best piece of advice you've received from a fellow cancer survivor?
Oh, geez. That's a tough one. The one thing that I really tried to do was not lose a sense of humor and not take everything so seriously. Like, yes, you're going through a very serious thing, but at the same time, if you take everything so seriously, if you listen to the things people say and you get so angry because they are trying to relate to you desperately, yet they cannot relate, like, you have to let that roll off your back. And it's unfortunate that you do. And so many people want to say it's not fair, and I understand. But oftentimes, and this is a very long-winded answer, when you're the person going through the treatment, you have to be the strongest person for everyone out there too. You have to be their support systems too. And if you get to a point where you realize that they're just trying to relate to you in any way possible out of love most of the time, I think it makes it a little easier to stop.
That was very profound. What has been the most useful resource either of you have turned to during the cancer experience?
There's so many. I mean, for me, I did a lot of reading on really internet forums. So I did a lot of reading on testicular cancer internet forums. I didn't participate. I just read. So, doctors tell you not to Google, but I Googled, and, there were certainly things that I didn't want to read, but that's where I also learned a lot of things. I also, there's a really wonderful group out there called Immigrant Angels that gives, peer-to-peer support. And I know some of those mentor-mentee relationships can be a very valuable source of experience sharing for young adult survivors.
Megan, what about you?
We were in a unique situation because, adolescent young adult movement, it was a thing, but it wasn't a thing at the Comprehensive Cancer Center where Mike was treated. It is now. They have a really nice program, but there were really no resources as a caregiver that I was aware of. Now, working in the nonprofit field, there's so many amazing AYA groups like Elephants and Tea, Cactus Cancer. I could go on, but there's a lot of resources.
What is the one thing you do to recharge or reduce burnout?
Well, for me, it's watching sporting events with my son.
What about you, Megan?
And I like to do yoga and I like to read.
All right, last question, you guys. What do you wish other people would know when they're navigating fertility as a cancer survivor or a cancer caregiver?
I would say you're not alone. There's a lot of people that reach out to us and they say, even if you can't give us a grant, it's just amazing to hear your success story, and it gives me hope to know that other people have made it through this challenge.
Yeah, I think, there were so many times that we would just talk about how hopeless it felt. And, we didn't understand what the outcome would be, but we kept pushing. We kept being our own advocates. We kept exploring different options out there. And the reason being is we knew there would be an outcome. And, we wanted to do everything we could to get to that outcome and then be able to accept it. So like Megan said too, you're not alone. I mean, I know people's outcomes can be dramatically different, but everyone goes through a journey and has advice to share and experiences to share and different things that they can do to help other people going through this.
Megan and Mike, thank you so much for sharing your stories. Thank you for sharing all the advice. Thank you for shedding light on, I think, areas that as a community we're just starting to talk more about. And thank you for doing what you do to help the AYA community and the broader oncology community. So thank you. This podcast, show notes, and newsletter is for general informational purposes only and does not constitute the practice of medicine, nursing, or other professional healthcare services, including the giving of medical advice, and no doctor-patient relationship is formed. The use of information on this podcast or any materials linked from this blog is at the user's own risk. The content here is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Users should not disregard or delay in obtaining medical advice for any medical condition they may have and should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions.